So yeah, let's just go back to talk about Terran versus Terran. So you heard me say that Terran vs. Terran in StarCraft 2 is weird because of the way that Tank Viking works. Tanks are obviously a very good unit. Even after that tank nerf, where tanks were dropped from 60 to 50 damage, tanks are still damn good. And the reason that it's Tank Viking and not regular tanks is because you have to think about this idea of the vision advantage. Because tanks can shoot farther than they can see, it means that if I can get my tanks and then have a flying barracks or a Viking so that my tanks can see your tanks, but your tanks can't see my tanks, then I will win this battle super one-sidedly. So what does this mean? What happens? Well, let's say I have 2 tanks and 4 Vikings. If you have 2 tanks and 5 Vikings, you win in the air battle. So in the end, you have vision advantage. You get to see farther, so your 2 tanks will be able to beat my 2 tanks, which is obviously no good. And then you'll be able to set up in all the good positions, and it'll just be a downhill battle for me. So then what do? I say, well, geez, I better make some more Vikings. So then my army becomes 3 tanks and 10 Vikings. But what happens? You went 2 tanks. You didn't make any more tanks, but then now you have 16 Vikings. So you still win this air battle. And even though you had a smaller number of tanks, you killed my tanks. Because you had the vision advantage. And that was kind of annoying for a while. But what makes Terran vs. Terran a very interesting and very dynamic matchup is the fact that you can sidestep this whole air battle completely. Because Vikings are honestly pretty damn bad against all the popular units in Terran vs. Terran. Marauders especially, they're bad against tanks on the ground. They're pretty bad against Thors on the ground. Very few things lose to a lot of Vikings. With except, I guess, Mass Marine or something like that. But, you know, you're not going to go Mass Marine against Tank Viking. So you end up with these weird situations where I start out making some tanks and some Vikings. You start out making tanks and Vikings, and you go crazy making your tanks and your Vikings. But then when you come to engage me, I've actually just made a bunch of Marauders, so I kill everything you have, and you have a bunch of floating Vikings out there. So a lot of players are doing a lot of interesting twists and changes to everything that's going on. So we're going to take a look at a game that Braddock played on Metalopolis. Here's Braddock playing against his opponent Druby from the extraordinarily strong and powerful team Root, who, you know, if you don't know that team name, you really should. They are just a phenomenal group of players. So Druby is going to be spawning here at the leftmost position, and Braddock is going to be spawning here at the rightmost position. And we are watching 2 games. Let me make sure I have sound. Great, good, cool, nifty. That would be like me to forget that. So we're going to be looking at 2 games in a row where Braddock does some pretty fancy stuff, and we're just going to talk about it because that's what I do in the Day 9 Daily. So he is mining minerals. Excellent. The typical style of play you're going to see in this matchup is the 1-1-1, where you do end up just getting a normally timed supply depot and a normally timed barracks. And then you take your gas on 13, get an orbital command, and then you get a factory when you can afford it and a starport when you can afford it. Very, very, very straightforward stuff. And again, the reason that that's good is we get some Marines early on to bolster whatever attack timing we end up using. And the Tank Viking is obviously the general mix that we are going for. And we get everything reasonably quickly. So let's go ahead and pick things up. And also the Marines are useful because we can deal with Reapers early on, which though they're infrequent, they're still used. So you have to account for that. And there, of course, is the refinery going down. Ain't that swell and well. Gonna drink a little bit more water. Isn't this tasty? So, meanwhile, we look over in Druby's base, and Druby is doing the usual sort of barracks opening. Now, I'm probably going to be focusing largely on Braddock, but Druby does something that's pretty damn brilliant at the start, so of course we're going to talk about that, because that is the advantage of a Terran vs. Terran matchup. If you're bad at Terran vs. Terran, you just watch a replay and watch whatever the winner does. Learn from that player. So see, yeah, look, good stuff, getting the Marine out, getting the orbital command up. Always good to get a Marine out early because you can kill off the incoming SCV, deny any sort of scouting. Love the fact that Braddock just briefly poked by the Xel'Naga Watchtower. Make sure that there was no early center expanding going on. Infrequent, but still a possibility. So you must account for it. So what we're seeing out of Drewby is the typical stuff. Getting the factory right after you get the barracks. Good junk. Same thing going on in Braddock's base. Now, even though the gas units are pretty important in this matchup, you don't need to get a bunch of refineries really early on. You can get it after your factory, and that's generally considered a pretty damn normal time to get your refinery. I mean, there's nothing too extraordinarily exceptional about that. Now, I want you to note, let's actually pause for a moment and come back and say, what do people normally do? Well, people normally go 1-1-1. Barracks, factory, starport. Great, because they want to get tank Viking. How do you get an edge here? You'll hear me say things like, don't do a different strategy, never run to different strategies, try to figure out how to do your own strategy better. So how do we go about doing that? And what we're going to see is Drewby do something pretty damn brilliant. Pretty awesome. What he's going to do is he's going to get a factory, and he's going to, get the add-on for the tech lab, so that way he can begin getting tanks, but then he's just going to build a command center before he gets any sort of starport. So he basically has all the available ground units. He has the same number of siege tanks as his opponent. He has the same number of marines as his opponent. His Viking count is going to be a little bit behind, but because he's planning on playing defensively, and Braddock would have to cross the whole map, then he has that defender's advantage. So that is how he is going to pull ahead. And see, here is a tank coming out. No siege yet, because there's the expo going down. Great. So meanwhile, we see Braddock doing a pretty standard opening mix, which is to get 4 to 5 Marines and to get a Hellion out of your factory, not to get any add-ons. I kind of dislike that Braddock didn't push. Generally, you can do, at the very least, a poke with the Hellions and the Marines early on. But what we're going to see Braddock do is we're going to see him go for this tech lab. He's going to go for some Banshees. Now, you heard me talk about all these tank Viking antics and the fact that you can get Marauders, but I neglected talking too much about Banshees until we got to see it actually go down here. And anytime you see a unit that you're a little bit, I guess, not expecting, do this. Pause and go, what can I learn from that? What is it about Banshees? In the early days of the beta, the answer would be, well, you get Banshees and he doesn't expect it, so you win immediately because he's awful, right? That's that. But now you just assume that he knows that this is coming. So it forces our opponent to have some sort of very strong anti-air, such as Vikings, or some Marines, but even Marines are kind of weak, so pretty much Vikings or Thors to be able to really deal super easily with a with a Banshee. And if you get Cloak, then you can do a little bit more harassment and force him to waste a little bit of money. And I used to be a fan of just getting the Banshee straight up, but people were a little bit too regular with getting these Vikings up. So I started to steer clear from it, but we're going to see Braddock get a Banshee with cloaking, and we'll come back and see the effects of this in a little bit. I'm not going to discuss it quite yet, but we're just going to note that Braddock did a fairly normal opening. He did go 1-1-1 style, and he's going to be opting for a Banshee first. Now let's go over into Drewby land, and let's also open up the resource station. So here we see that Drewby is just now barely getting the starport done. He will be beginning a Viking right now. He has tanks. He has siege mode almost done. He has a decent number of units. He has some Marines sort of poking around here, going to war with Braddock's Marines. Good supply depot positioning. But he does have this expansion finished. And we are also seeing this Banshee by Braddock go cross-map. And, this is something that's just amazing about this timing that Drewby has. Notice this Banshee, which is a pretty slow-flying unit. It's going to get there right as the Viking finishes. Isn't that timing just divine? And when I was going through all of Braddock's Terran vs. Terrans, trying to pick out some good replays for today, when I saw this, I was just like, wow, Braddock is screwed, right? Braddock is having to pull away. His Banshee has done nothing. As I try to pause, his Banshee has done nothing. He is only just now starting his expansion. He's way behind Droobies, who even has the orbital command finished. We do see that this add-on is going down now on the factory, so tanks can begin, but this 1-1-1 style opening from Braddock with the fast Banshees seems to have gone a little bit flimsily. But, Mysterious Braddock, what do you have in store for us? Cloaking Field, and a second Banshee. So now we can begin talking about the Marauder. So the Marauder, you heard me say, great against tanks, great against Vikings. Why don't people always just go for Mass Marauder in this matchup? Well, again, you heard me say that if I have more Vikings than you, I obviously win the air battle, and I obviously get air control. So what some players actually do is get like 5 Starports, 4 with Reactor, and 1, sometimes 2, with a Tech Lab, and they begin making Banshees. So that means